At first glance, Age of Calamity strikes me as an odd pitch. One of the game's main selling points is that it's set in the Breath of the Wild universe and will expand upon its story, but Breath of the Wild was mostly a setting and only occasionally leaned on traditional storytelling techniques, so translating it into a more linear story was always going to be an endeavor. It's no surprise that Age of Calamity focuses on the one concrete plot thread in all of Breath of the Wild, and if you had to pick one plot point from that game to build a Dynasty Warriors style romp around, it'd be the ancient war against Ganondorf. But effectively stretching out 15 minutes of cutscene into a full-length game is no small task. But as challenging a fit as Age of Calamity is, it's also an opportunity for a smaller spin-off story. You know, something you can actually enjoy over a dozen or so hours instead of having to put in 100. And the game makes remarkable attempts to translate as much of Breath of the Wild's mechanics over into an entirely different genre to create something that truly does feel like the original game. Some of those attempts are more successful than others, but when they work, they really work. And I came away from Age of Calamity far more impressed by its gameplay than I thought I'd be. In short, even with the previous Hyrule Warriors already proving it can work, this series continues to feel like a weird and interesting gamble, and I very dearly would like side experiments like these to succeed and happen more often. So let's give Age of Calamity a bit of love. As always, I'm Alex, and this is First 5, where I ask if games are worth your time, not your money. I played a game for 5 hours, and I'm gonna tell you if those were 5 hours well spent. And today we're fighting for the survival of Hyrule in Hyrule Warriors: Age of Calamity. Unfortunately, it turns out that Age of Calamity is less of a gamble than I initially thought it would be. The narrative I mentioned in the intro plays things incredibly safe, and the resulting story is a bit of a mixed bag. Not necessarily because it's a bad story, but because even from the first 5 minutes, it feels like it could have been so much more. Age of Calamity tries to tackle the first war against Ganon that happened 100 years before the first game. You know, the one where everyone involved died horribly. But the twist is that now there are time travel shenanigans involved, this plucky mascot robot is going back in time to undo the future that is Ganon, and suddenly my high-drama war story about facing down the apocalypse is in Saturday morning cartoon land, where the heroes go out, punch 1,000 bokoblins, and get home in time for dinner. And looking at the creative decisions Age of Calamity made, I can't help but think about Halo Reach, which pulls a direct parallel as a prequel in a beloved series covering a previous military conflict that went absolutely horribly for just about everyone involved. But Reach leaned into that opportunity. It used its unique position in its series to do something different. Even if you were somehow a Halo fan that didn't know what Reach was going to be all about, the game told you right from the start exactly how it was going to end, and that made it all the more engrossing seeing how it got there.
Colonel, this is Noble One. There are no rebels. The Covenant are on Reach. Acknowledge?
Come again, Noble One. Did you say Covenant?
Affirmative. It's the winter contingency.
May God help us all.
Age of Calamity finds itself in an identical position, and instead of leaning into its most interesting hook, it defangs it. It bunts. It's an incredibly Nintendo move that doesn't remotely surprise me. The Zelda series usually is intended for a younger age group, and the subject matter would be pretty dark, but that doesn't make it any less disappointing. To be entirely clear, Age of Calamity's narrative is fine. It's perfectly fine, but it also has about all the substance of a holiday special. All your favorite characters are here and as lovable as ever, and you can watch them do more fun and cute stuff together, but 5 hours in, it doesn't promise much more for anyone that's invested enough in Breath of the Wild's story to actually be interested in the idea of a prequel that expanded upon it. Which means if you want to come to Age of Calamity, you should do it for the Musou gameplay. Thankfully, if you do come for the Musou gameplay, you're gonna have a damn good time. Okay, so let's set aside all the grumbling about missed opportunities for a minute, because this game slaps. It's been a good decade since I've played a Dynasty Warriors game, or Musou if you're a particularly dedicated fan of the series. But Age of Calamity gets a shocking amount of mileage out of its 2-button combo system. This might not look like a lot of options, but every one of these branches is a different specific combo, and they all flow in and out of each other to create an extremely freestyle combat system. You can have Link do a quick uppercut, which links right into his air combo, which can turn into shooting things with his bow, and then you hit the ground and you can just keep going. And then on top of it all, every character functions wildly differently depending on a special ability they get. Mipha's all about being an infinite buzzsaw where all her combos loop back to the same uppercut finisher / opener, Urbosa's all about meter management, and Zelda gets to use her special ability to weave finisher moves in at any point in her combo string, making her incredibly freeform to get creative with. Even more interesting is how deeply Age of Calamity digs into Breath of the Wild's mechanics. The cooking systems here, they worked in flurry rushes, you get to pilot the divine beasts, they even have Korok seeds to hunt down for some godforsaken reason. In cases of the cooking system and Korok seeds, they're inoffensive side mechanics you can ignore at your leisure, but the divine beast sections are... well, they weren't my favorites. Even when the game doesn't benefit from it, Age of Calamity strives impressively hard to incorporate every part of Breath of the Wild and really sell this as a game taking place in its universe. But they also had a stroke of brilliance in how they incorporated Breath of the Wild's Sheikah Slate abilities into a completely different genre. While Breath of the Wild's puzzle powers were certainly usable in combat if you got creative, Age of Calamity formalizes them as part of your moveset, which in turn greatly expands your options in combat. Every character uses the same 4 abilities in completely different ways that accentuates their base kit. From Daruk's bombs creating rock piles he can manipulate, to Urbosa's abilities all having lightning-based follow-ups, to Zelda's absolutely bonkers roving bomb cart. At their most basic, these abilities are primarily used to counter special moves from enemy lieutenants, and while their cooldowns can discourage you from using them for anything else, they all feature secondary uses like how stasis can extend how long you can stun an enemy for, and can be devastating attacks in their own right if you weave them into your usual combos. Once you add them on top of each character's unique combos and abilities, suddenly you have a mechanical playground with a shocking number of ways to dunk on your opponents. It's no Devil May Cry, but it has surprising depth. On the metagame side, the meat of the game involves your standard map-wide 30-minute brawls Musou games are known for, but in between all that, the game has a ton of little side quest missions to run off on. At first glance, these missions might feel like an annoying chore to work through before you can get back to the main content, but 1, most of these levels are literally 3 minutes apiece, and 2, they're almost all designed to teach you how to play a specific character or handle a particular situation. But once you add all the different stuff you can do on the world map, your time does start to get bogged down about 50-50 between the main missions and the side content. Usually I found myself finishing a main mission in 20 to 30 minutes, unlocking 2 to 3 side levels I could collectively knock out in 10, and then spent another 15 just staring at the map, checking off random boxes, unlocking stores, upgrading my heroes, upgrading their weapons, figuring out where I had to go next to get the items for those upgrades, etc. Once you pile all these extraneous activities on top of each other, the map itself can feel a bit filled with padding, but thankfully it wasn't quite to a criminal degree. But while we're already discussing time investment, let's get to asking the big question. What do you get out of 5 hours with Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity? Well, I cheated and looked ahead, and I'm a little over a third of the way through the game's list of missions, though I've also been neglecting a lot of the side content to try and get that far. And surprisingly, I haven't been punished for that. Diving headlong into missions a half dozen levels higher than mine hasn't caused enemies to magically start one-shotting me or anything like you'd normally expect. So on normal difficulty at least, it's refreshingly easy to just ignore your level and push a little ahead in the main story. That said, the side content isn't purely optional. There's a lot of important upgrades that expand your character's abilities buried in it all. So while your mileage may vary, you're definitely supposed to engage with all these side systems regardless of how badly you want to get on the battlefield and whack something. Age of Calamity is clearly a game that wants to do right by its license. The way it's lovingly found avenues to incorporate almost every part of Breath of the Wild into a drastically different game, even when it's not terribly beneficial to do so, makes it difficult to believe otherwise. That makes the fact that Age of Calamity's story is so unwilling to engage with its own predestination all the more unfortunate and puzzling. But thankfully, for every missed narrative opportunity or mechanical quirk that didn't quite translate, there's another that works oh so well. Age of Calamity is a supremely satisfying game from a mechanical perspective, and despite any other complaints I might have, that's enough to make it worth recommending. Hey guys, if you like what you're seeing here, consider supporting me on Patreon. With your generous support, I can start doing all kinds of cool stuff like more in-depth video essays and 5-hour streams where I review games like this in real time. So if any of that sounds cool, please consider becoming a patron today. But I hope you enjoyed this first 5 review. Thanks for watching this far, and I'll see you all next week.